why Alaska? This indicates really many things regarding this summit between Putin and Trump. There is the first front and the first line of defense, and there is the freezy temperature. Perhaps these two guys really want to reach a settlement aside from the heated battlefield. So why is Putin going to end this war? Will he accept to annex Donbass and the Crimea as a primary proposition? Perhaps that's what Mr. Trump ordered for Putin to do, or proposed to Putin. So what are the boundaries right now, and what are the next arrangements going to be? Where is Ukraine from all this? Alaska, these territories had shifted to the United States previously, and today Europe is deeming itself outside of the market of selling the Ukrainian territories, and now Brussels finds itself marginalized. Thus, it is uprising and stating clearly that there is no solution without Europe, and Kiev signaling these messages to the United States before Moscow. So, is Europe now, will Europe now seek to hinder this summit or its outcomes? And how are the Europeans reading all this landscape and analyzing it? So here we are going to ask two major questions. Is the Putin-Trump summit really a beginning of settlement for the war in Ukraine? And the second question, is really Brussels willing to hamper these efforts? So to discuss these questions, we are going to be accompanied by Mr. Marcos Papadopoulos. He is an expert on international affairs. We welcome you, and we like to start by what a Russian analyst said, Stefan Meister. He stated that both leaders, are going to attend the summit for many goals, for different goals. Putin is willing to reposition Russia strategically, and Trump is going to end the war. Do you think that Trump or Putin is going to attend with having different goals from Trump?
First, allow me to set the scene. At present, in America, there is a power struggle between, on the one hand, the American deep state, and on the other hand, Donald Trump. And the American deep state, supported by the British deep state, is attempting to continue the war in Ukraine in order to try and inflict a strategic defeat on the Russian Federation. On the other hand, Donald Trump does not regard the war in Ukraine as either his war or America's war. In short, he sees no reason for why America should be involved in the war in Ukraine, either directly or indirectly. Furthermore, I believe that Trump's economic, military, and intelligence advisors have told him that the Russian military cannot be defeated in Ukraine, that the Russian military cannot be dislodged from Ukraine, and that the Russian military will emerge victorious. As a result of that, Donald Trump is attempting to, for one final time, to try and bring a peaceful solution to the war in Ukraine. That is why he has instigated the meeting with Putin in Alaska. But we should be very mindful that the war in Ukraine will be decided on the battlefield. The Russians will never walk away from Ukraine with just Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhie and Kherson. Why? Because one day when Trump is not president, when the deep state once again controls the White House, The new administration in America could start the war again and could attempt to add Ukraine into NATO. And if Ukraine joins NATO, that would pose a formidably dangerous threat to the national security of the Russian Federation, because there would be NATO troops and NATO strategic missiles in Kharkov, in Sumy, in Kiev, etc., etc. So the Russians will never tolerate anything short.
Dr. Papadopoulos, if Russia really asked to have an international recognition for its land in the Donbass, Kherson, and Zaporozhie. However, what Mr. Trump is stating, it looks like there is an arrangement and there is an agreement between them. No one knows what really Mr. Witkoff stated for Mr. Putin, but however, it looks like the Americans are accepting a land swap, perhaps, so the Russian may have a few lands, and also the Ukrainians will have such lands. Can this be implemented without the involvement of Europe and NATO?
Anyone who is familiar with what the lands which comprise Ukraine mean, not just to the Kremlin, but to the ordinary Russian man and woman, will understand what I'm about to say. The Russian military will not stop in eastern or southern Ukraine. At the very least, the Russian military will advance beyond Kiev to the oblasts, to the regions of Zhytomyr and Vinnytsia, which would then mean that Russia controls approximately 70% of Ukraine. Russia will not return any land to Ukraine. And I believe that Trump's military and intelligence advisors have informed him of that. That is why I believe, and anyone who is familiar with my work knows this, I believe that the White House and the Kremlin have come to a secret agreement concerning Ukraine. I strongly suspect that the upcoming meeting in Alaska between Putin and Trump is a smokescreen which has been choreographed by the White House and the Kremlin. It will allow Trump to say, because he knows that the American deep state and the British deep state will tell their puppet in Kiev, Zelensky, to not take part in any negotiations with Russia. Therefore, the war will continue. In light of that, Trump will then be able to say, I tried to end the war in Ukraine. It is not my war. It is Biden's war. It is the deep state's war. That will then allow Trump to walk away from it. He will no longer attempt to end the war in Ukraine. And that will mean that the Russians will not be impeded in their advance in Ukraine. So that is something that I believe people need to consider and people need to be very aware of.
So before continuing our discussion, we are going now to watch a small report about what the newspaper are stating regarding the plans ahead of this summit between Putin and Trump in Alaska. So what are the major concerns for Putin and Ukraine? CNN stated that Putin had laid out a map to end the war, including international concessions from Kiev to give Donbass and Crimea, and also get rid of the idea of joining NATO and freezing the current battlefield. And Bloomberg stated that Russia is going to end its attack in Kherson and Zaporozhie as a part of the current deal. However, it is not clear right now if Moscow is ready to give any land that it has already occupied, including Zaporozhie power plant, which is considered the biggest in Europe. This Russian plan raised concerns for the Europeans. And also there is ambiguity regarding the other parts of this agreement. Wall Street Journal stated that the European leaders had laid out a proposal to cease fire and to not give up or to hand out any lands or territories. And Ukraine had firmly announced its disagreement with giving any of its territories and to Russia. And also it asked to have more guarantees from the Europeans, including aids and weapons. So, Mr. Papadopoulos, a few people close to Zelensky stated for Financial Times that Zelensky has felt upset regarding the decision of Mr. Trump to conduct a meeting with Mr. Putin in Alaska, and that this meeting is going to be held without Ukraine. How do you deem Trump's disregard of Ukraine, and particularly that we are talking about Ukrainian territories, and do you think that they are going to reach an agreement without having Kiev involved?
When Zelensky speaks, it is the American deep state and the British deep state speaking. Zelensky is not an independent operator. He is a puppet of the American and British deep states. And as I said moments ago, the American and British deep states aim to continue the war in Ukraine. Thus, they will attempt to sabotage the upcoming meeting between Trump and Putin. But I'm also of the opinion that the American deep state is very aware that the White House may have come to a secret agreement with the Kremlin regarding Ukraine. And in essence, the secret agreement is something along the lines of this. The Americans give the Russians a free hand in Ukraine. In return, the Russians give the Americans a free hand in certain parts of the world. For example, in Greenland, in Canada, and perhaps in West Asia. Ukraine is of paramount importance, not just to the Russian government, but to the ordinary Russian man and woman. As I keep on saying, the Russians will not be dislodged from Ukraine.
Mr. Papadopoulos, can we ask you about the sources regarding these secret agreements and how can the Russia gives the United States a free hand to work in Greenland and Canada now. In Ukraine, the United States is there by the support of the United States. So how can Canada, how is this going to play out in Canada, and how is Russia going to allow the United States to have a free hand there?
I have been studying Russia. I have been studying international relations for nearly 30 years. And I am of the opinion that there are signs of a secret agreement between the White House and the Kremlin. So, for example, a few months ago, the White House and Zelensky signed a minerals agreement, which would give control of Ukrainian minerals to the White House. But then very quickly, the Russian army captured those minerals. Now, it is simply inconceivable that Trump's top military and intelligence officials did not tell him that these minerals, which have been afforded to the White House, will soon be captured by the Russians. At the same time, Trump very clearly has aspirations, for example, in Greenland. Greenland has been, since the late 1940s, de facto controlled by America. It is essentially an American surveillance region. The Russians know that. Therefore, if the Russians were to give the Americans a free hand in Greenland, it wouldn't alter the reality for Russia. It would just mean that Greenland would go from being an unofficial American region to an official American region. And at the same time, if the Russians were to simply stop...
Yes, this idea is clear, yes. We want to ask you more about the London's position and other European capitals that are allies for the United States. You stated that there is concerns for these states that Mr. Trump is going to work unilaterally with Putin while disregarding their concerns. And Mr. J.D. Vance met with David Lammy, and there were many. Do you think that the United States had assured that everything is going to continue and the collaboration is going to continue, or Europe is going to hinder any prospects of any peace?
Donald Trump knows that his principal enemy, the American deep state, is supported by the British deep state. That is why when Trump was in Britain only recently, he humiliated the British establishment by humiliating the British establishment's chief puppet, Starmer. He also humiliated one of the other puppets of the British establishment, Sadiq Khan. So it is very clear that Donald Trump despises the British deep state, and he and his team in the White House are aware that the British deep state, along with the American deep state, is trying to destroy his presidency, and that London, or the British deep state and the American deep state, will try to prolong the war in Ukraine, will try to keep America involved in the war in Ukraine. That is why there is a very serious struggle for power in America between Trump and the American deep state. Trump has no interest in Ukraine, but he does have an interest in other parts of the world. So, for example, I'm of the opinion that Trump seeks a rapprochement with Iran. Trump is talking with the Iranians. The American deep state and the British deep state are very angry at that. Trump wants to see diplomatic relations restored between Washington and Tehran. Trump sees a golden opportunity for America and Iran to trade with each other. Now, that is not something that the American deep state wants. It is not something that the British deep state wants. So again, that is why it wasn't just Israel, but it was also the American deep state who tried to instigate a war between America and Iran. And fortunately, the Iranian leadership and the Trump administration came together, worked together, and came up with a solution to get themselves out of that tricky situation.
Mr. Trump, if he insisted in reaching agreement with Mr. Putin regarding Ukraine, without taking into account what Ukrainians and Europeans are saying, so this means that there is a gap between Washington and its Western allies, right?
There is a very substantial gap between the White House and the American deep state and the American deep state's allies in Europe. And we have to be very clear about something. The British deep state does not represent the British people, and the ruling elites in Europe do not represent the peoples of Europe. And Donald Trump cares passionately about Britain. He cares passionately about Europe, partly because he is part of Scottish ancestry and he is part of German ancestry. So, for example, he hates what the British establishment and the European establishments have done by flooding Britain and Europe with third world immigrants. So that is another reason why Trump and people like J.D. Vance are constantly attacking the British establishment and the European establishments. So very clearly, when it comes to Ukraine, the American deep state, the British deep state, and the European deep state will do all they can to continue the war in Ukraine. But ultimately, if the White House and the Kremlin have come to a secret agreement, then that will enable Trump to walk away from Ukraine. He can cease all support to Ukraine by saying, it is not my war, it is Biden's war, it is the American deep state's war. I tried, I can't do anything more, therefore I am walking away from it. Trump's senior advisors know the importance of Ukraine to Russia and to the Russian people, and they have told him that the Russian military cannot be defeated, that the Russian economy cannot be defeated. Therefore, Trump believes that it is a waste of American money and a waste of American time to keep on being involved in the war in Ukraine.
Thank you, Dr. Marcos Papadopoulos. You are an expert on the international affairs. You were accompanying us from London. Thank you for being with us.